Hi, this is Jessica Brown. I'm an early childhood development specialist working with UNICEF. In this episode, we discussed the Ukrainian refugee response, and how important early childhood development and play is for the youngest children who have gone through upheaval and traumatic experiences, and to help them with integration. And we also spoke about the important role that cities play in providing these services and making young children feel like they're part of a community. Tune in to listen to this, and I really hope you enjoy the conversation.
Thank you so much for listening to Urbanistica Podcast. I am Mustafa Sharif, an urban planner, and you're more than welcome to join my big journey of exploring the making of smarter and more livable cities. Please don't forget to follow Urbanistica on the different social media platforms, and also let's connect on LinkedIn. Big thanks to Urbanistica podcast partner, AFRI. AFRI is an international engineering and design company providing sustainable solutions in the fields of energy, industry, and infrastructure. Are you ready for a new episode? Let's go for it. Today we have a new story and we have a new storyteller. I have the pleasure to welcome you, Jessica, to Urbanistica Podcast. Hey, and welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
How are you doing, Jessica?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm looking forward to talk about some of the interesting and rewarding work we do. So it's very nice to be here.
How was your summer, by the way?
Busy. A lot of traveling for work and also a little bit for play.
Yeah.
Which fits well with the theme of this discussion. I've been working a lot on the Ukrainian refugee response. So I've been in and out of the neighbouring countries of Ukraine, working on early childhood development programs, but also while doing other work that we do around early childhood education and care. So it's been a busy summer.
Yeah, amazing. So you will not have more summer vacation. Now it's back to work.
Now it's back to work, yes.
So where are you now? In which city?
Well, at the moment, I'm actually in Windhoek in Namibia, which is where I was born and where I grew up. I've come back to work from home for a few weeks to be with family. But most of the time I'm based in Geneva and traveling around a lot of the cities in Europe and Central Asia, which I work for UNICEF Regional Office of Europe and Central Asia. So one of the great things about that job is I get to see and visit many different places, lots of different cities, very different contexts, histories. But now I'm not in Europe and Central Asia. I'm in Windhoek in Southern Africa, which is a very different city with its own unique challenges and opportunities. So it's good to be back.
I can imagine. So yeah, now we started about you. You're our storyteller. So how would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. Well, I think in the context of this podcast, I'm really talking mostly about my work. So I'll introduce myself, first of all, from my work background. So like you said, I'm Jessica Brown. I'm an early childhood development specialist with UNICEF, working for the Europe and Central Asia Regional Office. We have 22 country offices that are our member states, but then we also work with a lot of the EU member states as well, which are beyond, some of them are beyond the 22 country offices. So I have been working for UNICEF for, I think, 7 or so years now. I started with UNICEF in Namibia, where I'm from. And I started working in the area of education and early childhood development. And I think I'm a very lucky person to be able to work in a field that really interests me. I'm extremely passionate about and interested in how we learn, how children learn, how we develop, and not just how we learn in terms of our, the academic side of life, but really how we learn about ourselves, how we learn about others, how we learn about the environment we're in, how that impacts our impressions of the world and how we interact with it. So I'm very lucky to be able to do that. And then I also have a political science and psychology background. So I'm also really interested in terms of psychology of young children, how that develops as we grow, but also, again, how the policies and how the legislation and how current affairs impact on our development, but also our psychology. So I think I'm lucky that I'm working in a space where all of these interests come together.
Yeah, like a dream
yes,
job.
Yes, exactly.
But tell me, like, how come that you start or you're interested in this within this
Sure.
field, like early childhood
Yeah.
learning, development? How come?
Well, I grew up in Namibia, like I mentioned, and Namibia is a newly independent country. I was born just before independence, so it's 32 years old as a country. And it's a post-apartheid setting with huge amounts of inequality. And in Namibia, the early days of independence, there was a huge emphasis on education to start addressing some of those issues of quality. And when it comes to education, in a lot of countries, in Southern Africa where I am now, but also in Europe and Central Asia, broader across the globe, we've put so much emphasis on education in the later years of life. We think that when it really matters is around high school, when you're doing your exams, when you're moving on to start earning and going into tertiary education. But actually, the early years are where it really matters. And I worked in Namibia and really saw how investments later on didn't have the returns that we expected because we weren't putting enough emphasis in the early years. And if you get that foundation right, invest in the early years, then you can build onto a really strong foundation for learning. But also, then you have a strong foundation of people who have good social skills, good emotional regulation, good understanding of themselves, ability to communicate. So it also means that in education systems, not only are your young people better prepared to learn, but they're also better prepared to interact with each other. They're better prepared to problem solve. You have less issues with fighting and bullying and all kinds of other issues that hugely impact the education system. And then you really reach the point where education can be a great equalizer. So investing in early childhood years really helps to break those cycles of poverty and inequality. So that's how I first got the hook of it. And then have been kind of expanding this work I've been doing into other contexts and really seeing this is relevant in all settings, high income, low income, the global south, the global northwest, everywhere.
So, what is like when you say early childhood? Like, which years are we talking about, and what are like the specific aspect of this age?
So the when we refer to early childhood, we're talking from conception, so even before birth, from conception to 5, 6 kind of school going age, based on which different kind of markers you're looking at. But basically, this is the period of the most rapid brain development of any time in our life. And it's a period where we really have this window of opportunity to ensure that our children are getting the best start in life. And in terms of best start, what we're thinking about, there's 5 main components that are highlighted in the nurturing care framework, which are the kind of package that all young children and their families ideally should have. So health and nutrition, early stimulation and play, with the big focus on play, nurturing care and responsive caregiving, safe environments, and those together create the perfect package for child well-being. And now you can also expand that to have a kind of expanded package that also looks at things like early identification of children with disabilities and more support in that area and so on. But that's the core package that if children have those integrated services from their service providers, plus the love and care of parents who are giving really responsive caregiving, nurturing care, and then in these safe and child-friendly environments, then you're giving children this best start in life. And play is a huge aspect of that when it comes to the development of the brain and socio-emotional aspects of the child.
When you say, Jessica, service providers, are we talking about like government or no?
Yeah, we're talking about a range of service providers. So based on how services are set up in different countries, it could differ. But I mean, generally, the core response initially and the policy and the legislation comes from the government. So you're looking at ministries of education and health and child protection, social welfare, those kinds of ministries. But then also how that then translates into service providers at the local level, what cities are doing, also service providers in terms of what's provided by NGO partners and by private sector as well. So it's a whole range of service providers, but the tone is really set at that high level by government and by ministries.
And like the package that you presented with all different aspects, this is to every single child on this planet, right? Like it's not like a European model or an African package or an Asian.
Absolutely. This is for every single child on this planet. It applies to a child who is from a high income country living in the lap of luxury. It applies to a child who is in an informal settlement. It applies to a child who's in a refugee camp. This combination of interventions helps to ensure that every single child has the best start in life. And I might add that that package does not have to be very complex and very costly. Of course, there need to be investments in things like your education services, your health systems, and so on. But in terms of the play and nurturing care and this stimulation that really helps to ensure that children are resilient and that they have this good start in life, this good foundation, that doesn't have to be costly or complicated at all. That's the matter of the parent and the adult in the children's lives taking time to talk to them, to sing with them, to read with them, to tell them stories, to show them, communicate with them, show them love. In terms of the play elements, children are so creative. Children will play with sticks and stones and all kinds of things. It doesn't need to be some fancy branded item. But what really matters is making these safe, welcoming, inclusive spaces where parents and children can come together and also play jointly, as well as the love and the support and the play and the services at the home.
So true. And also like about commenting about the like branding, say tools to play with. Children play with the air, like with nothing,
Exactly.
and they can make it like a game or a play. So when we talk creativity, so they are on the high level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's start to like talk about refugee young children. Like, what are the challenges that they are facing and their parents as well when they move?
So, I mean, the work that I've been doing has been specifically on the Ukrainian refugee response. So I will speak more about that. But
Yeah.
some of this applies to all refugee responses as well. So, I mean, in this situation, what we've seen is this absolutely unprecedented movement of people across Europe. There's been 6.6 million people who have left Ukraine into Europe by the latest figures from UNHCR. Of that, 3.8 million have enrolled for the temporary protection under the EU. So really enormous figures, and a lot of those are children. And as we know, because of the law in Ukraine, men between 18 and 16 aren't leaving. So the majority of these are women with children and a lot of young children. So in one way, this response is not a standard one, because the EU has opened up this incredible temporary protection order where people have access to housing, to education, and so on. But on the other hand, this is still a huge upheaval that these children and their families are going through. So you have the movement from Ukraine and all the fear and risk, and we've seen many stories about what that trip looked like for a lot of children and families, and then a lot of the uncertainty about where you're going to settle and so on. So you have families who have had this enormous upheaval. They're now trying to find housing, they're trying to find employment, they're trying to enroll children into schools and into early childhood settings. And then, of course, you have the emotional strain that the parents have gone through, the children have gone through, and just the general levels of stress and trauma and fear and so on. And also knowing that loved ones are still back in Ukraine, they're still in a very uncertain situation at the moment. So these children have gone through a lot. And prior to the refugee response, there was already a shortage of places in terms of early childhood education and care, ECEC, within Europe, and I mean globally, but within Europe for the focus now. So this has added a huge strain onto that service levels as it is. So not only are parents coming into Europe and neighboring countries and trying to settle and trying to find some kind of normality and stability, but like I said, many of these families are mothers with children. And in order for these mothers to get employment, they need to be able to put their children in childcare. If you and your child have already gone through such an upheaval, so much fear and trauma and unsettlement, you want to make sure where you're putting your child is somewhere that you are totally sure that they're going to be safe and happy and able to thrive. So there's a lot of challenges that these families are going through, and also just the sheer scale of the number of people moving put a lot of strain on the service providers. And what I think is interesting about this refugee response in the context of the EU and EU member states is that municipalities and cities and local authorities in general are really at the front line of this. When people cross the borders into Poland, for example, during the first wave of this, we really saw that the front line was municipalities who are trying to provide immediate responses. And now as people are settling into different localities, it's the municipalities and the cities and the local authorities who are working on trying to rapidly see how they can scale up spaces in their ECD, in their school, in their healthcare, and so on. So it's quite an interesting dynamic. And where also that we see within Europe is that often municipalities have quite a lot of autonomy. They might have different political parties in the municipalities and in the cities than in the central government. So there's quite a few things that need to be navigated. And also, I think one of the challenges that we can mention is that at the beginning of this response, we saw the most phenomenal outpouring of solidarity and support and volunteerism and so on. But 6 months on, there's still a lot of uncertainty. And maybe the realities of what it means to have a big influx of a non-national population in the country is coming to light. And we're starting to see some tension points. And one of the most easiest areas where you could see a flare-up of tension points is if local communities are no longer able to access services, or if there was already a shortage of services, like for the example of early childhood education and care, and care and play services. And then if local communities aren't able to access this, and then places are being taken up by the refugee population or external populations, then you can see tension points. So what UNICEF is actively working to do is try to address some of these challenges and also try to preempt some of these tension points and just make sure we can kind of avoid that, but then also actively use these services as an opportunity for really positive integration and for trying to kind of address some of these challenges before they bubble up further.
Yeah. Within UNICEF responsibility, like to which challenges are you responding?
So UNICEF broadly is working across a whole range of thematic areas and services, from health, child protection, working with adolescents, broader education, and so on. What I personally am
But
focusing
Jessica,
on, yes.
like UNICEF focusing on children, not on their like caregivers or service provider. Focus only children.
No.
Okay.
We focus on caregivers and service providers and more broadly. So yeah, and especially in this context, because like we mentioned, EU member states and the EU is this enormous force of planning and funding and technical support and so on. I mean, the EU is really they are laying the foundation for this response. But also UNICEF has a lot of expertise in working within refugee contexts. So UNICEF is working closely with member states at the national level. We have partnerships and plans at national level with the governments, with high-level ministries. But then we're also working closely with cities and municipalities. So cities like Prague, like Krakow, Warsaw, Bratislava, cities like that have really seen a huge influx of refugees into those cities. But then we also work with NGOs and with our other partners to really get on the ground to work directly with children. So we're in quite a unique context that we work from the top all the way down to the individual child. So in terms of what we're doing specifically around services for young children, so in terms of early childhood education, early childhood development, we have programs that look at trying to support the health system to be able to provide early health services that relate specifically to young children. So including around supporting breastfeeding and infant and young child feeding, including early identification of children with disabilities, strengthening the support system to parents who have young children. But what I work specifically on is more on the education and care aspect of it. And this is where the play element really comes in. So one of the things that we're doing across the refugee response countries is we've set up these play and learning hubs, the UNICEF play and learning hubs. And this is kind of a broad term that we use for kind of flexible and adaptable set of services that are designed to rapidly scale up play opportunities, childcare, and early learning opportunities, and using really different methods and different entry points based on what the needs are, what the context are. So, for example, in Czech Republic, we're working with the central government, who have a grant scheme that they will then fund municipalities, but also NGOs and so on, to adapt some of the parenting groups and parenting programs and parenting locations that they already have, to then add this play and learning and early childhood education and care services to that. And UNICEF's role is obviously both to fund that, but also we then really bring our technical support in making sure that this is done in such a way that is of high quality. So even though we're doing it quickly and kind of in a bit of a flexible, innovative way, we don't want to lose the quality element. but also to make sure that the expertise that we have around dealing with refugee responses and integration is brought in. Because here you have an opportunity to really make sure that those young children that are coming to the services can get some mental health and psychosocial support, that their parents can get that support, that you can work with the teachers and the animators on how to work with children who maybe Czech is not their first language or Polish is not their first language or whichever country you're working in. And also to be able to support the broader integration of these children. So these groups are not just for Ukrainian children, they're for all children plus Ukrainian children. And the idea is that we really have an opportunity here to use these playful, joyful groups that not only stimulate children, help with all of their holistic development, but also helps to help them deal with some of the challenges that they've been through, ground them into their new societies, and be able to start learning a second language, and at the same time for the parents to get to support and for the parents to start integrating with other parents of young children in those communities.
Yeah, and just before we continue, I have a question
Sure.
because media sometimes telling us like all the support, all the money, all the teams are going only to help Ukrainian refugees and like not really considering the others, let's say from Syria or other countries. Is that true? Like, what is? Tell me, like from your perspective, you're working with UNICEF. So, like, how do you prioritize, or what's
No,
happening?
UNICEF works with refugees from all over the world. Yeah, that's the work that I'm doing. I'm on the front line of the Ukrainian response because that's under the regional office that I'm working in. It's part of my portfolio. But UNICEF is working with refugees across the world, global, all refugees. Yeah, we don't discriminate.
Yeah, so like all let's say this kind of disinformation or in media or in some news TV news channels that tells like the help is going only for Ukrainian children just because they are European. So this is not true.
No, I wouldn't say that's true. And I think the Ukrainian refugee response has got a lot of attention in this region. I think because it does, it is something that a lot of people maybe relate to more because of their own personal experiences and so on. But UNICEF works with refugees of all nations. Yeah.
And also like when you say playing, I mean, should you really like prioritize this or just thinking about that this child should survive? I mean, you're talking about playing hubs and so on, but is it not that prior that just get this child to a safe place and that's it?
Of course, I mean survival is number one. Like I mentioned before, I think in this context, the survival aspect in terms of once young children are out of Ukraine and that they are in the neighboring countries and that they've registered with refugee status and they have this temporary protection, I think we are fortunate in that much of the survival part of it has already been handled. I must say the response from member states has been absolutely phenomenal. People arrive, they can register, they get access to housing, they are able to access cash that's transferred to them. They can, start already registering for jobs. So I think in this context, we thankfully can say that the survival aspect of it is less of a challenge. But of course, the countries that are taking in a huge number of refugees are also really having to rapidly adapt, and that's also somewhere where UNICEF is providing guidance and technical support and so on in making sure that countries have the support that they need to be able to put these survival mechanisms in place. In other contexts, yes, of course, your number one priority is to make sure that these children are safe, that they're fed, that they're warm, that they're, have access to sanitation facilities and so on. But that's the very baseline. In order for us, we need to also then think beyond survival to thriving. And we have seen from other refugee contexts the huge impact that not having this playful, joyful development element can have, so that something that is a short-term crisis can become a huge long-term impact in a person's life, and especially if they experience this crisis in these early years. So what we're trying to do is really put in place opportunities for play in order to stop this from happening. And play sounds like it's just play, it's kind of frivolous, it's kind, this light, fun thing. But in reality, play lays the foundation for all of our development. So play supports children in terms of their psychological development, their emotional development, their cognitive health. It makes them more resilient. You play to make friends, you play to learn a new language, you play to relieve stress and worry. to manage with your communication. We develop empathy through play. And also, play can be a really useful tool in a situation like this. Play can be really useful to help to speak to children and help children process some of these awful experiences that they've gone through, and their fear and their concerns and their traumatic responses to things. So through play, you can work with puppets, you can use stories, you can use role play to help children really process what they've been through. So at the early part of this response, there was a group of psychologists in the Netherlands, for example, who were working with Ukrainian psychologists to help show parents how they can really work with their children to process some of their fears through play. So, for example, you can have puppets, and one puppet can ask the other puppet one of the questions that might have been eating away at this child, like, I'm feeling scared today because I think, I was hearing loud explosions. And then the other puppet can help to explain what it is and actively can give the child tips about how they can protect themselves, how they can calm themselves. I also feel scared, but when I breathe deeply, and things like this can really help. And then equally telling stories about what's happening to the children, because sometimes we think not talking to children protects them. But actually, if you can help give them enough information, coping mechanisms, some opportunity for hope and relief through play, it really helps to process these complicated feelings that they have. And then also what I would like to add in terms of how vitally important play is look at it from the perspective of the parent. If you are a Ukrainian mother who has gone through this nightmare journey, you've decided to leave your house, your family, everything to get out of the country for the safety of yourself and your children. You've gone through this nightmare journey. You have the worry and the fear of the people you've left behind. You maybe have, you were processing a lot of very complicated feelings. Then you move to a new country. You have to totally rebuild your whole life. Everything that gave you your identity, your status, and so on, you've had to leave behind. Then you also have the financial worries. You have all of these massive worries about your partner back home, your brothers, your fathers, and so on. Then you're trying to settle in a new country where you don't necessarily speak the language. You're having to go through a huge amount of administrative process. And the whole time your child is being dragged with you and they're cold and, whatever. You must be dealing with so much guilt and worry. And that is the last thing that one of these parents needs on top of everything else that they're going through. So imagine the relief to then be able to take your child to one of these happy, joyful places that's clean and safe and, where it's been designed with you in mind. And you can go there and you can see your child interact with another child, laugh, play, start using some of the materials, pick up puppets, read books, run around. The relief for that, for a parent, is just you can't put a value on that. So what we're trying to do in this is not only make sure that these children have their optimal development as well as every other child should have, but we're also really trying to look at how we can use these services and these interventions to prevent long-term negative impact of these traumatic experiences for the child, and to use play as a kind of protective blanket to put around these children and their families.
So like play is much more deeper important than what we think. Like sometimes maybe when you think about refugees, we say, "Oh, just give them a roof and a food, and that's it." But now, with like from what you're telling and from also like what science is telling us, is like this is so important not only for today, but for all the coming years.
Absolutely. I would really say that for these young children, play is that link between surviving and thriving. And it gives you back this sense of self, this ability to self-regulate, this dignity, and this kind of, you can bring joy and playfulness to even some of the most difficult situations and make them light and make them easy and make something positive come out of them.
Exactly. And can you tell us more about the UNICEF's play and learnings hub?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like how is it like a physical room, or is like something just the tools?
No, it's a physical space. And like I mentioned, they can come in different forms and different structures and different approach.
We have many like architects, designers, so you should be specific
Okay.
now.
In that sense, it's not a physical thing that we take in and set up in one go. We make use of what's already there, but this is something that we're actively exploring. So we are very interested to also see how we can move this into kind of modular, prefabricated, maybe movable spaces as well as communities shift and the needs change. So I'll take you up on that. But what we've been doing is trying to identify existing spaces, and this is again working very closely with cities and also some of the smaller municipalities. So what we're trying to do, or what we are doing, is we are identifying existing spaces that can be used, that can be transformed into these play and learning hubs to try to quickly scale up the availability of early childhood education and care spaces. So in some places it might be a library, it might be a hall, it might be a theater, it might be just some former office space that's had to be reworked to make it child friendly. So it can really be whatever space is available that's suitable to children, and that can also have manage some small adaptations to make it more child friendly. And what UNICEF does, so the municipalities help to identify and provide these spaces. And what UNICEF does is that we bring the expertise in terms of the people who run and lead these groups, and also some of this kind of methodological guidance about how best not only to work with all young children, but also specifically with this lens of refugee children, children who've had traumatic experiences, children who are not speaking this local language, and then also how to really work on using these opportunities for integration. So, and again, they have different formats. So in some places it might be a full, morning to afternoon daycare if that's what needed, but obviously with the quality element and with the early learning and stimulation element. In some places it can be more of a kind of informal play group where the mothers bring their children together and they sit with other parents and children, and they have a kind of facilitated session for a few hours that works on doing little activities with the kids, getting the parents involved, maybe also speaking about some of the specific concerns that parents might have, like my child's not sleeping, or my child, is having bad dreams, or hasn't been speaking as much, or whatever, which might be some of the responses that come from what the children have been through. And what we're also doing is using these and then in between, so different modalities and different intensity based on what the need is. And what we're also doing is using these spaces to really provide a more kind of holistic package of support to the parents as well, because you can only it's like in the airplane when you get told to put on your oxygen mask before you help children. This is really how it needs to be for parents as well. So a stress frazzled and a supported parent can't do their best for their children. So there's also a focus on really trying to support the parents, working to make sure that the parents have an opportunity to not only meet and integrate with other, say, Ukrainian mothers, but also with mothers from the host community, start language exchanges, start sharing some learning a little bit also about each other's children and having a bit more opportunity. And then also the ability to speak to the people who lead these groups, who can give them with more advice and tips. And then also, because it's linked to the municipalities, we can link them up with other services if for whatever reason they're not able to access them yet. And also, just one more thing on parenting that UNICEF is doing, which I think is really exciting, is that we've developed a parenting app called Bebo. And in this crisis, we translated the app into Ukrainian, but also into the local languages of some of the neighboring countries that have a lot of refugees. And the idea is that this app is for parents of children 0 to 6 to help give them tips, guidance, information, articles, to really help to ensure that they are able to do the best parenting possible for their children.
Yeah. And when you go to the municipalities, do you have a criteria of like how the space should look like, or no? Any available space it could be a UNICEF hub?
Well, we always want the spaces to be suitable for children. So there's certain quality elements that should be available.
Can you tell us?
Yeah, sure. So things like, we don't have one concrete document because we want to have a level of flexibility, but things like you want to have adequate toilets for children, you want to have proper ventilation, you obviously have to have security elements that not just any person can come in, and you also want to have enough space that children can really have space to play, like we mentioned. So we don't want little desks and all the kids sitting there, schoolification, pretending that they're in a school setting. So you want enough space for indoor play. Ideally, you want outdoor play as well, where children's motor skills can be developed. So if it's possible to have some kind of outdoor play spaces, this is not always totally possible in packed cities, but things like that. So we definitely want to have all of those elements. Ideally, if there's going to be a full day service, you want to make sure that there's a kitchen where food can be provided. You also want to make sure that all the cleanliness elements are there. So those are kind of more in terms of the environmental aspects. But then, of course, we want to have more of the kind of process quality standards. So that's around really what do the interactions between that educator and the children look like. So really making sure that the people that we're working with understand how you do play-based learning, really understand how you support and stimulate social development, emotional development. and so on. So, and then also linked to that, like I mentioned, really understanding how you work with these children, and not just how you play with them and talk to them, but how do you identify potential red flags? Who do you refer to if you are concerned about a child's health or well-being or mental health? How do you also then link this to other services to make sure that, if you have a concern about a child, you can access the health services? If you think that a child maybe has a learning or developmental delay or disability, how can you make sure that you can get multidisciplinary teams that can support the child and their family? So that's a big focus. But we really work with the municipalities to understand what do they have, what do they need, what are the gaps, how do we tap into their existing services and build on what they have. UNICEF doesn't want to come in and create duplicate services, and we also don't want to create kind of parallel where we have one service for Ukrainians and one for local community. We really want to build on what is there, make sure it's integrated, and just complement based on the challenges that the municipalities also identify.
Do you find these spaces like within inner the city, or usually they're like real out of the city? How is like the in general, like when you want to create these hubs,
Mm.
the municipality provide you with the spaces within the city center, or like gives you like a very far away because maybe the city center is fully packed?
Well, so far they've been pretty central. Yeah, we haven't had a cases of things being really far out of the way and sort of tucked away. I think the response from municipalities have really been trying to optimize spaces that they have that are also accessible for the community. So it's not a huge challenge for them to be able to access or costly, or they also don't want kids on trains for hours on end trying to get to these hubs. And in some of the smaller municipalities, it's really central. I mean, it's within the local library or within the local town hall or something. And that's we want to design these to be as practical and accessible, and also we want these to be dignified services. Not that you're ashamed to slope off into the suburbs to go and get some subrate service. Not at all. We want these to be quality, playful, joyful, dignified services that people are eager to access.
Because I was thinking like if they give it in the within like the city, or like let's say they put them in the industrial area, because there is a space, and just put them there and that's
No,
it.
no, no, definitely not. That's not. We wouldn't be up for that. And also, maybe one thing to add is that in some of the cities, there are still families within these accommodation centers. Much less so. I mean, cities have been phenomenal in finding housing for huge numbers of people, but there are still some accommodation centers. And what UNICEF is also doing is trying to have already established and are maintaining play groups and kindergarten, like these learning and play hubs within the accommodation centers as well.
And tell me like about the work behind the scenes. Like how do you reach out to municipality, the work groups, how many people involved, like all this coordination? It's like
Yeah, it's
I
huge.
can imagine it's like a crazy and big.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not
Well,
easy.
luckily, UNICEF has a lot of experience in doing this multi-sectoral coordination, but no, it's not easy. And also because historically we haven't had a refugee response crisis like this in Europe for since World War II, of this magnitude. And UNICEF doesn't obviously historically work in these higher income settings, so we had to go through quite an adaptation phase of going into countries and having to form new partnerships from scratch. So this was different from if we had a country where we already have a big country office and all of the mechanisms and everything set up. So it was a interesting, challenging, and rewarding process, I would say. But the response and the welcome that we received from the cities that we've been working with has really been phenomenal, and we're incredibly grateful to their openness. So what happens, the process is that UNICEF signs agreements with the government to say that we have the permission to work within this country, within these certain terms. And then after that, we can then open doors with municipalities. And I think in this setting, the need was so clear. The municipalities were also aware that they had to rapidly respond to this. And like I mentioned, especially in this area of early childhood education and care, there was already a big shortage. So I would like to think we came with quite an easy sell of, we know that this is already a challenge. We have this idea. How can we go about it to co-create it with you, to really make sure it's suited to your context, and work on trying to scale up service delivery in a specific area with you. So we have teams within UNICEF who are multi-sectoral. So like I mentioned, across education, health, the ECD, child protection, and so on. The team would kind of jointly go to a municipality and work with them to identify the areas where they think support is needed. Based on that, we develop work plans. We agree on what we can do. As much as possible, we really try to be collaborative so people don't go to one corner for one service and run to the next corner for another service. And we try to see how things can be brought together. And again, the municipalities were often leading this brilliantly and didn't need our involvement necessarily in terms of that. And I think what we really tried to do is, like I mentioned, not duplicate anything, but try to bring our specific refugee response lens, maybe our specific lens really on the child development aspects, what key uncompromising pieces need to be there to ensure that we're optimizing those opportunities for development of the child. And then we start. And we also work a lot with NGOs. So a lot of the municipalities anyway have existing partnerships with NGOs. UNICEF also identified and partnered with NGOs. So this is really a multi-stakeholder response. UNICEF is there, but also other UN agencies. We work with governments and ministries, with local authorities, municipalities, cities, and then with NGOs. And then also, private sector have been also very interested in supporting in this response. So it's exciting to see this multi-stakeholder response, but then that also needs coordination to ensure that you're maintaining benchmarks and quality assurance. And that's another big role UNICEF plays, is that once these are up and running, we are really doing a lot around quality assurance.
And like all these should happen in a quick time because you don't have time to waste, right?
Yeah.
So like how do you make it like so quick? Like signing, like identifying the stakeholders, talking with them, signing the agreements, get the team, and all of this.
I can tell you that our first weeks of this response, there was a lot of running around, a lot of very long hours, and really trying to speak to as many people as we can. Our teams went to these countries and arrived on the ground and hit the ground running, trying to identify who's doing what's needed, because you also don't want to develop services that aren't fit for purpose. So a lot of it is really trying to establish what's the situation, what's needed, what does this response need to look like, and also how do we create a response that can be adaptable. So yes, it's a frenzy at the beginning. You set up different coordinating groups where you have NGOs and different partners coming together, sharing their information. And some things are done quicker than others. So, for example, some of the initial play groups that we set up in the registration centers and in some of the accommodation centers in this first wave of people, still crossing the border and moving, that we were able to do much more quickly, because that was a matter of just quickly getting teams there, getting toys and resources. And for example, Lego, who are also involved in this Real Play coalition, they provided toys and Lego and so on that could help to accommodate some of these centers. So there's the immediate response that is about trying to rapidly put something together on the ground to help as quickly as possible as many children as possible who are in that context. But then there's a slightly longer response that is around still emergency, still rapid, but a bit more maybe systematic, and trying to build up a response that's around quickly putting in place partnerships and trying to identify and then putting in place these services. So that would take, a few more weeks to get all of that settled. But we look at it with this kind of two-prong approach.
What is the biggest challenge that you're facing when you're like collaborating with municipality or even in the process? And what is like the key in making this work successful? Like mention one from this.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is almost linked to the question that you asked, that when you have this big crisis response, trying to convince people that play, early childhood education and care is very important in this, because our immediate response is, shelter, food, safety, like you mentioned, which are all
like boxes, put people in boxes, give them food, and that's it.
Exactly. So, and of course that's also necessary. So then trying in the early days to really make the case for why this is important is a challenge. And of course I understand why, because these municipalities are at the front line of the response. They have a huge number of people who have needs from them, and they have to rapidly, respond to that. I would say one of the key things is really to act collaboratively. UNICEF is not going to be able to do this alone. NGO is not going to be able to do it alone. And I think municipalities have also found that it's a huge challenge for them to do it alone. So the idea is really to get partners together with a clear plan, to work jointly and to make sure, like I mentioned, that you're not duplicating things. You don't want to come in and create some parallel system. You want to come in and build from what already exists. And I think linked to that, about building on what exists and not duplicating, is really making sure that you're creating services that can be absorbed by the system to increase the whole offering for all of the population, for the local population and for the incoming population. So you're not just looking in to put up a tent that you can then take down in 3 weeks. You're looking to really build the capacity, build the systems, develop structures, develop a way of thinking and an approach that can be absorbed to create more spaces more broadly going forward in these areas of service.
So, Jessica, like when you build the system, build the hubs, do you plan that this gonna be for a few months, or you plan that these people will be back home? How is the mentality?
That also evolves. I mean, when this whole crisis started, so the way UNICEF works is that when there's something like this, we put together a refugee response plan jointly with other UN partners, so including UNHCR, who's the High Commission for Refugees. So the initial refugee response plan is for 6 months because you don't know what the situation is and how it's going to be evolved. Now it's being extended. So, I mean, the way UNICEF looks at it is that as long as there's a need, we will be there. And also we want there to be, especially in this context, we really want to build sustainability into it. We think there's obviously a high chance that a lot of people may stay. And I think in our case, working in the space of early childhood education and care, there's anyway a need for these services. So if people leave, there's still, there will still be a need for these services. So that's how we think about that.
Is it like hard to argue because, like, all the, like, let's say, talk about play, about early childhood and so on, the effect you see maybe not really tomorrow. This will be like in a few years or a few months. Is it like, how do you measure like what you do?
That's a good question.
Okay, you save so many, so like you save so many people, so save so many children, you build so many hubs and so on. Like, but talking about the long term impact,
Yeah,
how do you deal with that?
that's a good question. And it's something that UNICEF does a lot of work on around how do you measure child development. Um, I mean, I would say, are you a parent yourself?
No.
Okay, so I was going to say, I think some of the changes you do see in a day or two. If a child has gone from being scared and feeling insecure, not having a routine and so on, to being in these places, in a few days, in a few weeks, you will see this child coming out of their shell, being happier, engaging, and so on. So some of those things are immeasurable by a checklist, but the parents see them, the teachers see it, that the child feels the difference. So in terms of that, you can immediately pick up some of the changes. In terms of how you measure child development, there's different indicators and tools that UNICEF use. I mean, one of the set of indicators is called the ECDI, which is the Early Childhood Development Index. It's a set of questions that you ask to a parent about how the child is developing and what things that they can do yet at different stages of the child's life to try and gauge what kind of milestones they've met and so on. So that's kind of a complicated measure that quite takes a lot of time and so on. There's also simpler scales that you can use. So, for example, there's a scale called the Leuven scale where you can measure how engaged a child is and a child's level of well-being in these centers. So those are quite good to quickly gauge. So if you're in a center of low quality, you can instantly walk in and see this child is bored, they're not interacting, they look upset, the teacher hasn't noticed. You can quickly pick up on issues of quality, but equally you can quickly pick up this child is super engaged in what they're doing. Look how nicely they're playing with other kids. They're smiling, they're happy, they're communicating their needs. So there's things like that you can do. And then also within this space, there's a lot of more service access indicators and things that you can use. So you can see how many are reaching these, da 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 da. And then also what I think is really important to do in everything that we deliver as a service, we really need to make sure that there are opportunities for this end provider to provide feedback. So UNICEF has this approach called accountability to affected populations, which is where we are essentially asking the population that we work with, that we're accountable to, what do you need? Is this right for you? How would you like it differently? And really trying to co-create services based on the needs of the individuals and the populations that we're working for. So I think having these feedback mechanisms built into things is incredibly important. So basically, I mean, there's different ways of measuring it based on how scientific you want to be, how kind of numeric you want to be, whether you want to have a qualitative approach. But what is extremely important for us is that we are finding out from the end user, is this what you want? Does it work? And if not, how do we adapt it and make it better?
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about the team, like the organization, from the people within the hubs up to, I don't know, like how is the division, the teams? Because I know that UNICEF is a huge organization,
Yes, huge.
but at the same time, you're doing like an amazing impact, which means like there are doers and they're in a strategic level and in all the levels. So can you tell us about the organization? How is the structure?
Sure. I mean, the way that these are put into practice again differ based on which specific country or locality you're looking at.
Let's talk about your team, your case.
But
Yeah.
yeah, in kind of general. So I work for the regional office. So we were involved in the initial response to this crisis because we didn't have country teams in the countries or in most of the member state countries where there are really high numbers. We already had country offices in Bulgaria and Romania, Croatia, some of those countries, but we didn't have, for example, in Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovak Republic, where there was a huge wave of people in the first wave. So our team were initially involved in the response. We went in to try and identify what was going on, what are some of the challenges, what exactly are the needs, what does it need to look like, who are the partners, starting to make relationships with the different municipalities and so on. And then what we did was we set up teams in those countries. So once we had agreements with the government, we went in and set up teams in those countries. And within those teams, we have an early childhood development person or a few based on the scale. So that person, together with guidance from the regional office and from our HQ teams and from our emergency teams, would then work to identify partners. And I mean, this is not a totally sequential process because we also identified partners and started things based on when we were initially there. But this is kind of broadly. So identify partners, start having relationships with the municipalities and so on. And a lot of the work that we're doing in this response is really either directly with municipalities through their existing systems or with NGOs. We don't have enormous teams in the countries that are, actively working in each center. The way UNICEF works is always through implementing partners. And we help them to conceptualize, design, make sure that all the methodologies are correct. We help them do quality assurance, and we kind of, oversee the standard of these products. So in each country, I would say we probably have 4 or 5 different NGO implementing partners that we're working with specifically on early childhood education and early childhood development. And then we have national high-level agreements on some of the more systematic kind of policy and process level work that needs to be done. So including things like, exactly like you mentioned, like around monitoring and evaluation, how do you collect data on the impact of this and how we measure it and how you link it up with national data systems and so on. And then we have partnerships with the key big municipalities. So, for example, with the municipality of Prague, we're in the process of finalizing that. We have, with Bratislava, with Warsaw, etc. And then also with some of the smaller towns and cities and municipalities that maybe have, for some reason, that they have a large, number of refugees in that locality, or that they had a big transit hub during the wave of people moving and so on.
How many emails and phone calls you get per day?
Oh, too many. No, I'm lucky. I'm lucky to get fewer now that we have very strong teams in our countries. So the country teams are managing the day to day. But yes, there were times where there were very long days and the phone wasn't stopping and the emails weren't stopping to ping.
I can imagine.
But we're lucky because we're in this position where we can bring all these different partners together and help to coordinate things. So I'm not going to complain about my inbox.
No, and like a huge respect and support from all of us, like all around the world, to UNICEF, to the teams, to the NGOs. Like you're doing such an amazing and important job. So we appreciate what you do.
Thank you very much. And I mean, UNICEF really appreciates our partners. It wouldn't be possible without them. So I'm going to pass your appreciation on further.
Yeah. And talking about collaboration, the partners, and so on. So, what does like Real Play City Challenge mean for the UNICEF, and what's the role of UNICEF in this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really exciting challenge. So UNICEF is part of this Real Play Coalition. That's a joint initiative of UNICEF, Lego Foundation, IKEA, National Geographic, and Arup. And I mean, for us, this is all about getting this excitement and playfulness into the work of cities, of partners that are working in urban spaces, to really try and add this child lens and this playful lens to the work that they're doing. And the Real Play Coalition more broadly has done a lot in terms of really advocating for the role of play in young children's lives, and to kind of move away from this more, joyless, schoolified approach to child development. So this particular challenge, we're encouraging cities and urban practitioners to apply. It's this year's theme is local communities, global challenges. So I think this refugee response really fits very well under that theme. So I would really encourage partners, but also other cities, other urban practitioners to consider this challenge if they're working around play and early stimulation, early childhood development, with specifically refugee populations, because there's two of the three themes that I think this speaks to perfectly. So one is places where play heals people, and the other is places where play unites us all. So, and for us, this is obviously one side of it, is that an opportunity to continue and expand and support some of the really great work that's happening. But also for me, it's so exciting because I will now get to see some really innovative, cool, emerging, real problem solving ideas that are coming out from around the world. And I really want to see these good practices and these ideas and say, okay, maybe this is something small, but how can we take it and apply these principles to what we're doing, to what our partners are doing? How can we really, also scale up some of the great ideas that I'm sure we're going to see from it? And how can we use this kind of hub of learning and sharing and celebrating each other's successes to see bigger impact, more innovations, and support this great work? So for us, it's a very exciting opportunity. Just to add, the closing date for the applications is the 4th of September. So really encourage anybody who's working in this urban space with a kind of playful lens to go and apply. And the website is realplaycitychallenge.org.
Awesome. What do you want, like, what do you want to achieve with being part of this challenge?
Well, I think it's like I mentioned, we want to be able to support really good innovations that have started, and often they start with not much investment. So often they're really affordable, accessible solutions that have been designed within the unique context that they are trying to problem solve in, and to then give them awareness, but also to try to catalyze and see how those can expand to reach more children. So it's all about, expanding access for people to have opportunities to have these playful moments and to be able to really, promote child development. But like I said, it's also, we need to always be learning and innovating and improving in what we're doing. I think if we stagnate, we've lost the game. And often in big organizations, the innovation side of it is not always as easy as in smaller NGOs and small cities. The city structure, I think, is such an exciting, such an exciting level of government that things are really doable. You're directly in front of the people that you're providing your services to and that you're doing all of your work for. So I think you see a lot more collaboration with it at this level. You see a lot more innovation at this level, and then also the urban partners that work with them. So I think there's so much for us to learn, and for us to see not only how do you scale what already exists in the localities that they work in, or to some other localities, but really what other principles can we learn? How can we take this and improve our work and move it forward, and also share it more broadly with a range of partners? And there's a really nice, innovative, exciting, collaborative energy behind the Real Play Coalition. And I believe you also were interviewing the Lego Foundation, and I mean the way that the work that they've done to really bring joyfulness and playfulness into a serious topic is wonderful. And we also want to keep this spirit going in through the coalition.
What is fascinating you when you work alongside with urban practitioners, designers, placemakers? Like, what is the coolest thing you see within this collaboration?
Well, I think unfortunately, I personally haven't done that much one-on-one with urban practitioners, but it's something that I'm really interested in doing more. And I think just how quickly things can move. I think sometimes when you work in more traditional approaches to things, like I mentioned, there's such innovation in that space. And again, I haven't worked in it enough, but I'm very excited to. And really seeing how quickly things can move, how problems that you thought maybe were going to be insolvable, there's always some elegant solution that somebody can come up with. And again, I think it links to this, the work that I have done with people in that space. It feels like there's a playfulness in your work. And I think it's missing from a lot of other sectors. So how can we also harness that and optimize it to join the work that we're doing around children's development and play with the playfulness and the problem solving of what you do in cities and in urban
Yeah.
planning.
And Jessica, you mentioned schoolifying.
Yes.
What does it mean? What do you mean by schoolifying?
I think traditionally we have thought that in order to be really educated, we have to have this level of seriousness to us. And often with young children, people want to give their children the best, which is obviously very understandable and admirable. But there has often been a belief that in order for serious learning to be taking place, very serious, development, you have to be sitting at a desk and you have to be at your little chair and you have to be writing things out and it has to look, quiet and organized and disciplined. And what we see then is that young children who learn through play, who their brains develop through this process, like I mentioned before, you problem solve, you make friends through play, you build your tower of bricks, and then when it falls apart, you realize you haven't made the base strong enough, and you learn to problem solve that. So all of these mechanisms that we use to learn get lost through schoolification because children are then too young to put into kind of a formal school style setting, which really limits our ability to explore, to problem solve, to play. And then it has an active impact on the abilities for children's, optimal cognitive development.
Interesting. And before we move to the last section, I have two questions. Like from your experience working at UNICEF, being in so many different countries, we have many urban practitioners listening to you now. So, what should we stop doing when we plan cities in order to make them like more playful and joyful?
Well, like I mentioned, I don't have a huge amount of experience working directly with urban planners, and it's not an area that I know enough about to tell people what not to do. So
And I
I
think
would
this is a great because then you're like not within this how to say team. So we need your perspective.
Sure. So maybe just to say, there's a few kind of principles that maybe I would promote. So I think I was reading some data that we expect, around 70% of the world's population to be in urban areas by 2050, maybe even more. And I think it's going to become increasingly evident that space is really a luxury for most of us. So the way I see it is that if you are able to build shared spaces, common spaces, and cities for children, if it's good for children, it's going to be good for everybody. That's how I really see it. And I really like the Bernard van Leer Foundation's Urban 95 project, which is about thinking of a city from the eye line of a 3-year-old. And what does that look like to a 3-year-old? And my thinking is that really, if you're looking at creating a city that's for young children, that city is going to be safer. It's going to be physically softer, more gentle. It's going to be more functional, I would imagine. It's going to be more self-explanatory because a 3-year-old has to kind of figure it out. It's going to be more interactive, has more surprises, more kind of fun elements, more attractive, I hope. And I think there's not one of us as an adult who wouldn't want that of our city. So I think that principle of thinking about how a child would see it, but also thinking about how not just the most privileged child would see it. How would a child who doesn't speak the language see it? How would a child who maybe has a disability see it? How would a child who's not, financially in a higher bracket see it? So I think keeping that in mind, and I think specifically linked to this response, really thinking about firstly including the voices of children in decision making. So I mean that's a principle for everything that we do, and I think again in terms of thinking about child-friendly cities. And really thinking about how can a city play a role in integrating societies. So, not having segregated sections, not having lower income sections that are far out. I mean, I think all of these principles anyway apply to a lot of what urban planners anyway bear in mind. And really thinking about how can shared spaces actively promote integration. And I have a really nice example. So I normally live in Geneva, and Geneva is a city with a lot of children. And it's a city where a lot of people who have maybe been working for the UN or other international organizations and have been in all kinds of higher risk emergency posts and so on. If you have children, this is a post that a lot of people choose because it's nice for children and it's a very family friendly post. So something that I saw in Geneva that I've never seen in any other city is in the parks, they have these little paddling pools for young children. And we've had this very hot summer, and suddenly these paddling pools were the absolute height of activity and flurry of activity in these parks. And you saw children of every single background coming together to paddle and to play and to splash around, all different languages, speaking to each other, not caring slightly that they didn't necessarily understand each other, because you do understand the fun and the splashing and the play. And then you see the parents around there interacting with each other, all keeping an eye on each other's kids, really having this joint, joyful, playful experience. And I thought that was such a nice example of really looking at the city through the eyes of the child, and these joint spaces really bringing people together. So I think bearing in mind things like that is lovely. And so my main message would be, look at the city through the eye of the child. And, there's beautiful frameworks out there that can give more detail on that, like the UNICEF Child's Friendly City and the Bernard von Leer Urban 95. But yeah, I think that would be my takeaway.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Really, really valuable points. And what skills you think we should learn as urban practitioners or practice more?
I mean, I think it's a skill that all of us should learn across all of our different fields of work that we're doing, but really how to actively encourage child participation in these processes, because it's something that's very easily said, but actually meaningfully engaging with children and finding out what they need, what they want, what they don't want, what their worries are, how they interact with their environment. So I would say that.
Yeah. Thanks for your reflection and feedback for us. And so now we're in the last section of this episode. And I have 3 questions for you. First one is about you giving a message to UNICEF.
Sure. So I thought about, and I would say, I think this crisis provides, it's really shone a light on some of the gaps in services that exist. So like with young children and this early childhood education, and especially in cities, there's a huge demand for spaces. There's never enough. So I think this is something that we really have to see what lessons can be learned from what we've done in this refugee response and how can we apply them to other contexts. So there's a lesson here that I think we have now seen how we can rapidly scale up these services with quality. And now I think we have a responsibility to take those lessons and roll them out more broadly into other countries, into other contexts, and to really embed this into reforms of this sector, and to take a very challenging situation and try and get some positives out of it beyond this immediate response.
And 3 takeaway messages to all our listeners.
Number 1, which I will drum on for until the rest of my days, is that early childhood is so important. It is so important. From conception to 5, 6 school going age, this is the window of opportunity for our young children, for the future of our families, the future of our countries, the future of our cities. And we really need to get that right. And getting that right involves, like I mentioned, health, nutrition, early learning and play, safe environments, and nurturing care and responsive caregiving. And I think cities can really play a huge role in helping to provide those 5. The second one would be that play is a really powerful tool, and it's a protective blanket, not just for children, also for adults, for parents, for people who've gone through very difficult times in their life. And we need to take more time to embrace play in every aspect of our lives. And that 3 is that we really have an exciting opportunity here and a responsibility here to mitigate the long-term impact of this crisis on these young children that have come from Ukraine. And we can do it in a very playful and joyful way.
Yes, exactly. And the last question, but this time it's not me asking it. Now it's your turn to ask questions. So what is your question to me and to all our listeners?
So my question to you and to all of your listeners is, how can you be more playful? And how can you provide more opportunities for other people to be more playful?
Interesting. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much, Jessica, for giving your valuable time to record this episode. And also thank you so much for the team working hard for making life better for children, for caregivers for everybody.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak about the work we're doing, and also to think about it from this angle of urban planners, from the angle of the city. So I think, as well as being able to speak a lot about something that I'm very passionate about, it's also given us a lot to think about. So thank you to you.